Now, welcome to part 3 of my story about what happens if Ahsoka Tano never leaves the Jedi Order and is instead at the Battle of Ringo Vinda, where she and Fives begin to unravel the true purpose of the clones, which is of course to carry out Order 66 and kill the Jedi. And very quickly before getting back to it, if you have not seen part 1 and 2, I'd highly recommend checking them out first, and a link to both of them will be in the description below, and probably comments as well. And if you end up enjoying them, you can obviously then just come back to this part, and every subsequent Tuesday, and sometimes maybe Wednesday, a new part of the story will be up. Anyway, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We pick things up on the planet Dathomir, where Maul is reaching out a hand to Ahsoka, offering her the chance to join him so that, as he says anyway, together they can save the galaxy from the impending doom that awaits it. For several long seconds then, Ahsoka seems to consider this, but finally she says, "You really think I'd ever join you?" Maul briefly snarls at her and snatches his hand back. "Foolish Jedi, there's so much you could learn from me, and you will now share in the responsibility for what happens next." But quickly Ahsoka, still on guard with her lightsabers activated, says back, "There's nothing you could teach me that my master already hasn't. Nothing that I could accomplish with you that I couldn't with him." Maul's look then suddenly changes, as if her words have triggered something that he's now lost in his own mind looking for. He then says more to himself than her, "Your master. Yes, you're the apprentice of Anakin Skywalker." With a rather proud look, Ahsoka says back, "I see you've heard of him." But Maul either doesn't hear or ignores her entirely, and again says to just himself, "Of course, it all makes sense now why the Force would send her here." To draw his attention back, Ahsoka does a quick flourish with one of her lightsabers, which does indeed capture Maul's eye. She then says to him, "What do you think you know of my master?" Maul grins for a moment, but then the look on his face turns to anger as he says, "I know that he has become my master's ultimate prize." Maul then locks his hands behind his back and, like a predatory animal, immediately begins to pace. "I once saw it over and over in my visions, saw our final triumph over the Jedi. But now the Force shows me something else, someone else at my master's side. In them where I once stood, he now does. Where it was once me who storms the Jedi Temple and slaughters the Jedi, Anakin Skywalker now does." Ahsoka then briefly looks extremely troubled and concerned, but quickly tries to hide it and says, "Visions from the Force? I think you mean the lies of the dark side." Maul stops his pacing and gives her an almost sympathetic look and says, "Ah, you Jedi, thinking there is a difference between the two, that the dark side is something separate, when it is instead the truest nature of the Force, and soon your master will learn this." "You lie," Ahsoka says back simply, but Maul gives her something like a frustrated sigh before saying, "So arrogant, so blind. This is why the Jedi's strength with the Force fails them, while ours only continues to grow." Maul emphasizes his point by making a tight clenched fist, which is when Ahsoka seems about to say something, but is cut off by him. "Consider my words and why you've been led here very carefully, my soon-to-be apprentice. Meditate on it, or whatever it is you Jedi do." Ahsoka quickly snaps back that there's nothing to consider, but Maul only turns and walks away, leaving Ahsoka standing there completely unsure as to what to do. She partly looks like she wants to go after him, to challenge him perhaps, but another part, one that looks concerned, seems like it wants to head back to her ship and to get out of here, and perhaps back to Anakin. But before she can choose to do either one, she hears a faint bird-like call and looks up into the sky and sees a colorful convoy circling above. That's when she deactivates her sabers, takes a deep breath, drops to her knees, and closes her eyes and begins to meditate. Which is when we're taken to Coruscant and into the apartment of Padme Amidala, where we see Anakin Skywalker standing before a computer terminal that's projecting the bluish holographic image of Jedi Master Shaak Ti. A moment later though, as if reaching the end of a discussion, that image of her flickers and fades away, leaving Anakin standing there with his arms folded and a look on his face that's half upset and half intrigued. That's when Padme comes up behind him, wraps her arms around his waist, and says, "Please tell me that wasn't the Council with your next assignment. You just got here, and you said they were giving you some time away after your victory at Ringo Vinda." Anakin shakes his head and says, That was Master Shakti on Kamino. Seems I ordered Fives to escort Tup there for a brain scan after he suffered a head injury at our last battle. Padme then looks confused, pulls away from Anakin, and says, "Why would you do that?" Anakin turns and faces her before saying, I didn't even know Tup was wounded." Padme casually says back, "Well, it's not like you can keep track of each and every single one of your men." Anakin looks a little hurt, offended, and upset all at the same time before saying, "I know each of the men that serves under me by name, by their real name, not their numbers. If one was wounded, I should know about it." Padme seems taken aback and says, I didn't mean to imply." Anakin, though, quickly shakes his head and takes a quick, calming breath and says, "I know, I'm sorry. It's just that it seems like Ahsoka lied to me and falsified orders, and I'm not sure if I'm proud or furious right now." Padme gives a faint smile, then wipes it away and says, "Why would she do that?" "I don't know," Anakin replies, "but I'm going to find out." He then begins to punch commands into the computer terminal in front of him as Padme asks, "Where is she now?" Anakin replies, "She should still be on Coruscant. She wanted to speak with Barriss." "Barriss?" Padme repeats as if the name leaves a bad taste in her mouth. She then shakes her head a bit and says, "No one gets to see her, not without authorization from the Chancellor himself." "Which she had," Anakin replies, which draws an inquisitive look from Padme. "I, asked for a personal favor. Oddly enough, the Chancellor didn't seem to have any issues with it." Padme then seems to have something she wants to say or ask, but is considering whether or not she should. Before she's possibly given the chance, we see some information pop up on the terminal screen, which seems to confuse Anakin as he says, "Strange, she's not at the Jedi Temple, and according to this, she left the detention facility some time ago." Anakin then punches some more commands into the terminal and says, "Wherever she went, she took her ship and didn't log it." Padme then asks, "I didn't think you Jedi had to log all your movements, which is how you get away with being here so much." Anakin gives her a bit of a sly smile before saying, "We don't, generally. But if she took her ship, that's different. Not to mention, as a Padawan, she's obligated to always tell her master where she's going." Padme then gives him a bit of a playful look and asks, "So, which part is more upset right now? The master that his Padawan disobeyed, or Anakin that she didn't take him on whatever little adventure she's going on?" To that, Anakin shakes his head and says, "No, something tells me this isn't a little adventure." Without another word or apparently thought, Anakin turns and takes a few steps towards the exit, but then stops dead in his tracks. Without turning around to face her, he says, "I have to go and find her." Padme, looking more than a bit frustrated, then says, "Ahsoka can take care of herself. She proved that when the Jedi turned their back on her. And that's why I have to find her," Anakin responds back. "She doesn't know who she can trust anymore, and I have to let her know that she can still trust me." "She knows that, Anakin. She does," Padme says, a look of something akin to desperation on her face. "She knows your faith in her never wavered, never would or could. Whatever this is, it isn't about you. It's all about her learning who she is on her own." Anakin shuts his eyes and lowers his head, and we can almost feel how this is all tearing him apart. Finally, he says, "I know some tricks. It won't take me long to find her, to track her ship, and right after I do, and I find out what's going on with her, I'll be back." Slowly then, as if wanting her to say something, Anakin again heads towards the exit. When he reaches it, Padme finally says, "Will it always be like this?" We again see the pain on Anakin's face as he replies, "No, not when this war is over. Everything will be different then, I promise." He then finally turns back and looks at her once more, and on his face is nothing but a resolute, almost too resolute, expression as he says, "Which is why I will do anything and everything I can to end it." That's when we're taken to Kamino and back into the middle of a med lab where we see Fives shaking his head as if coming to, or coming out of whatever happened to him after Dr. Search asked him to comply with Order 101. In the room with him, on an operating table, is Tup, who is still unconscious and now has a covered incision on his head where his chip was removed. Standing nearby is also Dr. Search, who, with an almost too innocent look on his face, asks, "Are you quite all right, Clone Trooper?" Fives, holding his head in his hands, responds, I think I'm fine. I don't know what happened." Dr. Search then chimes in, Perhaps it's you who needs a brain scan to make sure you're okay. Fives gives a bit of an awkward chuckle and says, yeah, maybe you're right, or maybe I'm just tired. Haven't got a lot of sleep in the past few days, or in the last few years, really. That's when Dr. Search says, luckily for you, I engineered your kind to require minimal sleep and to function efficiently even when going long stretches without it. Fives makes something like a shrug and says, thanks for that, I guess. Dr. Search then tilts his head slightly, eyes him keenly for a very long moment, and then asks, does it make you uncomfortable when I refer to the fact that you were engineered? Fives thinks on that for a moment and says, it's something all we clones know. We know we were made just to fight a war, and yet you could say it's not something we like to think about. How curious, Dr. Search says, though you were also engineered to not concern yourself with trivial matters. Fives thinks on that a moment and then says, is thinking about the point of your existence really something trivial? For the briefest of moments, Dr. Search looks almost flabbergasted and speechless. He then manages to say, fair enough, I suppose. For another very long moment then, one where Fives looks rather uncomfortable, Dr. Search again eyes him keenly and then finally says, after glancing down at Tup, tell me, why do you care so much about the well-being of this clone? I don't understand the question, Fives says. He's my brother. To that, Dr. Search nods as if that, or something like it, was the expected answer. He then says, yes, camaraderie was also something I engineered into your kind. The hope was if you had genuine concern for each other, you would look out for each other, protect each other to some extent, and thus losses would be drastically cut down. The problem was making sure you didn't show too much concern for each other, that it ended up being a distraction and thus a detriment. Fives then shakes his head and says, no, I don't think you understand. He's my brother. They're all my brothers. Dr. Search opens his mouth like he's going to respond, to argue against that, but quickly shuts it when he sees the look on Fives' face. I see, is all he manages to say. A moment later then he goes on, do you have any idea why you and your brother Tup, was it, why you were sent to me? Fives just shakes his head and Dr. Search continues. Partly it was so that Nala Se could remind me of my place, that the one who had first helped design and engineer this glorious army had been reduced to treating a head wound one of them had suffered. But the other reason is that it is believed more than any of the rest of my people that I just see all you clones as a creation, no more, no less. Fives looks a bit confused, but then asks, and do you just see us as a creation, I mean? Dr. Search ignores the question and again asks, why do you care so much about Tup? Without hesitation, Fives snaps back, he's my brother. Dr. Search nods a bit and says, and do you believe you feel that way because you were engineered to feel that way, or because... But Fives cuts him off and says, he's my brother. I told you, they're all my brothers. Dr. Search then taps a long finger on his chin a few times as his eyes become distant as if looking into the past as he says, Nala Se doesn't realize it yet, but she has made a critical mistake sending you to me. For once, many, many years ago, my life was saved by a Jedi named Sifo Dyas. Fives now looks more confused than ever, but remains silent and listens. This Jedi would then come to me several years later, saying he feared the coming of a great war, and that the Jedi would need an army to fight it, and so I promised him that army. Dr. Search's eyes then refocus and fall upon Fives, and all he says is, you were never intended to be more than soldiers. Creations meant to fight a war you would have little or no stakes in. A cruelty beyond measure, perhaps, but an even greater cruelty now awaits you unless we act, and act fast. We're then taken back to Dathomir, where night has now fallen, meaning that likely several hours have gone by since we were last here. Nevertheless, Ahsoka is still in the exact same spot we left her, one where she sits cross-legged on the ground in a deep state of meditation, and perched on her shoulder, its eyes also closed, is the convor we saw circling before. Soon enough, though, we see Maul approaching, and as he does, the convor lets out an irritated screech and quickly takes to the sky. And as it does, Ahsoka's eyes open, and she watches as Maul draws ever closer to her. With his eyes on the ever-ascending convor, Maul then says, "Why did you bring that foul creature with you here?" "I didn't," Ahsoka says back. "Not exactly, anyway." Maul then gives the Convor one last angry look, as if he's repulsed by it but doesn't even know exactly why. He then says, a somewhat hopeful expression forming on his face as he rather subtly outstretches his hand, "Has your meditation offered you clarity then? Has the Force shown you the true reason it led you here?" "It has, somewhat," Ahsoka replies, getting to her feet. "One thing it made absolutely clear is that you are not to be trusted." Maul makes a bit of a snarl and his hand falls back to his side. Ahsoka then continues, "But it has also warned me that there is some truth to what you say." Looking extremely troubled, Ahsoka takes a few steps towards Maul and then says, "All I know is I can't believe you about Anakin. I can't and I won't." Maul offers her a sympathetic look and takes a few steps closer, with there now being only a few paces separating them, and he says, "And yet you do. The same way the Force led you here, it's leading your master to him, to Darth Sidious, my former master." Ahsoka, looking ever so troubled, lowers her eyes as Maul goes on. "Always so many possible destinies. Usually they are hidden from us, obscured. But it's clear only two lay before us now. Either our masters will join together and destroy this galaxy, or we will come together to stop them." Once again, Maul reaches out his hand, and without requiring another step forward, Ahsoka is now close enough to simply reach out her hand and take it, which she starts to. But that's when we hear a lightsaber ignite, and both Maul and Ahsoka turn their head in the same instant to see Anakin standing some 50 or so paces away, his irate eyes visible in the soft blue glow given off by his saber. Without a word then, Anakin charges at Maul, who is so caught off guard, having been completely distracted by his interaction with Ahsoka, placing all his focus on it and trying to cloud her mind to sway her to his side, that he never sensed Anakin in advance and ends up fumbling a bit for his own saber. Nevertheless, he manages to ignite it shortly before Anakin's first swing at him, a powerful top-down attack that would have split him in half the opposite way Obi-Wan once had. Ahsoka then cries out, "Anakin, you don't understand!" But all Anakin says back is, "I don't need to," as he raises his saber to attack Maul again. And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part and what you think will happen next. And just a reminder that part 4 should be up next Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest. So anyway, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.